I'm Linda Fox. I'm in the PhocusWire studio and I am with Rhys Griffiths, and he's the travel lead at law firm Fox Williams. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So we've got a lot to get through in terms of the legislation that's perhaps already in place or about to before the industry. Let's start with the package travel regulations, because that is the biggest piece of legislation affecting the industry. What are the changes that travel companies need to be thinking about when it comes to that piece of legislation?
Yeah, well, the package travel regulation is the biggest consumer regulation affecting travel companies in Europe. So up until now, only travel companies which sold bundles of products would be caught. So you put a flight and a hotel into a basket, you click buy, and so that would be a regulated package. Whereas what's happening at the moment is that the lawmakers in Europe and the UK are looking at sort of significantly expanding the footprint of what that regulation covers, so that it's also going to cover sales of single travel services, provided that those are bought within 24 hours. So those platforms which have separate tabs for maybe flights, hotels, car hire, they're going to be brought in to this regulation, previously not having been brought within it. And this is quite significant because it does mean potentially having to obtain licenses from certain regulators. Certainly in the UK, joining insolvency protection schemes, there may be constraints on use of cash, requirements to segregate customer money. So it's actually a real imposition. It's the most sort of stringent piece of travel regulation that we have, and by expanding the footprint, bringing a bunch of other companies within it, it's just going to mean many more restrictions on the way that companies can operate.
So, clearly the thinking is consumer protection, and the thinking must be that many of these companies have sat outside those regulations for decades now. So what would you say are the kind of top two things that, that the likes of the big online travel players need to be thinking about? Well,
this is going to be coming in over the next 12 to 24 months. So obviously planning is going to be important. Some of the key issues that they're going to face is actually a responsibility as a platform, responsibility for proper performance of the travel services, in spite of the fact that those travel services are going to be performed by a hotelier, for instance. So it's thinking through the risk of that, because if anything goes wrong, a customer is hurt or injured, whatever, in a hotel, liability for those personal injury claims are now going to sit with the platforms. So that's something that needs to be thought through in terms of how do we manage that risk. Indemnities from hoteliers, health and safety systems, insurance, things like that. And the other thing as well is thinking about what the implications of insolvency protection are going to be. That's the other big requirement. So depending on where you're based in Europe, there are different requirements for insolvency protection, and some schemes are preferable to others.
Right.
So we do have this passporting system where you can base yourself in one European country, sell throughout the European Union. So it's really thinking about where is the best place to have that insolvency protection, because some are more light touch, some are very stringent.
Okay.
So it's really thinking that through.
What you're talking about there and some of the implications, it sounds really costly. Need it be?
Well, it is. It is costly. This is a common complaint. It's costly, and it's also, it can restrict the way that you want to operate your business.
Yeah.
So up until now, having a platform, it's fairly light touch on regulation, and all of a sudden being brought within it, I think companies are going to find it very costly and very difficult to come to terms with this.
Yeah, because they have been used to operating in quite a different way. And interesting. I did want to touch on sustainability, because I think it's probably about a year ago now that we started talking about the corporate sustainability reporting. That is now in place.
Yeah.
And companies are having to say, what percentage of what they're having to show offsets, they're having to provide information. What are the implications of that for travel industry?
Well, it's really actually there are initiatives in the UK and in the European Union, both fairly similar. I'd say the European Union legislation is probably more stringent in terms of information which is now going to have to be reported in company accounts. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea is giving more transparency on greenhouse gases emissions, energy usage, other sustainability KPIs, and also the potential risks of, for instance, climate on the business.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe taking an example of that. See, in Europe in recent years, we've had certain countries being extremely hot during the summer.
Yeah.
There's been lots of speculation about whether that's going to change customer behaviour, whether they're going to travel to those southern European countries. So that's a risk to OTAs brought around by climate change. So that may be something that's an example of something which will need to be reported on.
There must be implications there for, you're a big company, say an Amazon or a big consultancy, so like a Deloitte, and you have a big traveling population. There must be implications there somewhere as well.
Yes, I mean it's all around the impact of the business as well on climate, on the environment. So you're now going to have to track this as a company and also have it audited as well in your accounts. So these are things that companies are going to have to start getting to grips with.
Yeah, and if you don't, I mean, if you what's the penalty?
Well, it'll be fines essentially by regulators for not filing proper accounts.
And would you anticipate that we might start to see that relatively soon, or are we still kind of bedding down?
Certainly bedding in periods until the end of 2026 with this legislation. But as with all of this sort of legislation, there has been a trend in recent years, particularly on some of the consumer stuff, to turn to turnover-based fines to make companies take their regulatory obligations seriously. Yeah. So that's something which is on the way.
Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, now they are also tightening up their regulations. So tell us what's happening there.
So the CMA, I mean, there's been a step change in two things really: enforcement of consumer protection legislation in the UK, which, and actually in Europe as well, which hitherto has been the regulators haven't had any real sort of finding powers, and that's all changing with what's known as the DMCC Act. And this is an act which basically gives the CMA the power itself to determine whether there's been a breach of consumer law, and if so, then to impose turnover-based fines on that travel company, for instance. So, and those fines are up to 10% of global turnover. So, for a big travel platform, that could obviously be huge. So, that's been the real step change, and the regulator has been asking for these powers for a long time. We have always had the consumer protection legislation, whether it's unfair trading practices legislation, whether it's package travel law, but compliance has been not great across the industry. So that's all changing now with these new finding powers that the regulators getting.
So what's the CMA looking at right now? What do they want to fix when it comes to online travel companies currently?
I mean, it's been pretty clear about the areas that it's interested in. It's interested in price transparency.
Okay.
So it's obsessed with this concept that the first price that the customer sees
is the
final price that they pay.
Yep.
So that means drip pricing, where a booking fee may be added on late in the booking journey. That's something that the CMA is extremely hot on, and similarly with resort fees, tourist taxes.
And that's happening a lot in the US as well.
Yeah. They're really hot on that.
Okay.
And there's actually been a lot of dialogue on consultation on this, because it's not an easy problem for OTAs to fix. But the regulator has been really bullish about it, and it wants those prices included within the headline price. And I'll just say the third thing I'll just mention as well is pressure sales taxes.
That pressure selling stuff.
Pressure sales tactics. So countdown timers, that's a big one.
Nearly gone, and 5 other people have looked at this quick before it's
We've all seen it. We've all seen it. So I mean, they've been quite vocal about that for a long time, and actually, just today, the CMA has, for the first time, launched investigations using these new powers. And what's brought about those investigations are drip pricing concerns and pressure sales tactics. So I think it's just kind of endorsing the fact that these are the issues that the CMA is really interested in.
And I understand that a whole lot of letters have gone out to companies who perhaps are engaging in some of these tactics. Travel is quite prominent when it comes to those letters. Yes. Are you surprised by that?
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily surprised. I mean, the particular travel is such a competitive industry, particularly online, and there have always been issues with discount claims, pressure sales techniques, countdown timers, things like this. So travel companies have always competed hard, sometimes walking up to the line, sometimes walking over the line. So this is the whole purpose of what the CMA is doing with these advisory letters, which of the 100 that they've sent out in the UK, the 19 are to travel companies, and that's the highest number across all industries. So they are clearly interested in the travel industry.
Okay, Ned, is that because the travel industry is an easy target? Is that because the travel industry, as you say, walks up to the line, sometimes over the line, because the travel industry likes to push the boundaries?
Well, yeah, you could say that. There have always been, from time to time, there have always been issues in the UK and in Europe as well. The regulators have tended to have picked on the very large platforms, corrections from binding commitments from them to change their practices, and then they've used that to persuade other smaller OTAs and booking platforms to comply. So it's always been an issue, I think, just partly because of the competitive nature of the industry. So
switching to Europe for a minute, Digital Markets Act, obviously Booking in that, Google in that, Digital Service Act, I think again Booking targeted there. With everything that's kind of going on with AI, everything that, all the talk of data, do you anticipate more travel companies being pulled into that?
Yes. I mean, specifically in relation to the Digital Services Act, which is going to bring in a whole bunch of different travel companies which previously have been largely unregulated. So it's the main piece of tech regulation in Europe now. It applies to online marketplaces, and what it's seeking to do is to make those marketplaces, or to make them responsible for illegal content which may appear on their platforms. So up until now, those platforms have been able to source content, or allow users from all over the world to upload content, some of which may be sold illegally. And it also not being clear whether the person selling is a business, is a consumer. So, the purpose of the Digital Services Act is really to regulate all of that. Put obligations on the platforms to weed out illegal content, to have notification mechanisms for consumers and other users of the platform to notify them of illegal listings. And what I'm seeing is actually one of the most difficult aspects of the DSA to comply with is an obligation to gather specific information about the traders using your platform, and then to publish that information on your platform as well. And that's just so that users can see it. And that's just really difficult to comply with in practice because of the way that actually those platforms may source that content, not from the supplier itself, but maybe from an intermediary who sources from another intermediary. So actually getting the information that the platform's obliged to provide is proving to be extremely difficult.
There's already concerns being expressed about, the scale and scope of the large language models, and the kind of the sorts of deals that they're doing with the large OTAs. So, the big get bigger. At some point, does DMA start to look at those AI platforms?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I have the sense, I think, at the moment, particularly with the Europeans are rolling back a little bit on some of what they're doing with the AI models, and the UK taking a very cautious approach in regulating the AI platforms because they don't want
they want to attract the investment. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be slow. I think it will happen at some stage. I think other players in the industry are going to be complaining that what these large language models are doing may actually be sort of regulated activity, which isn't being regulated by the regulators. There's already a bunch of regulation which applies to these platforms. Straightforward consumer regulation, package travel directive. If I can ask ChatGPT to book me a flight and a hotel, then arguably it's carrying out regulated activity.
Yeah,
so,
unless because ChatGPT is unlikely to be the merchant, maybe it's going to fall to the merchant. That's going to be the get out, isn't it?
Yeah.
You would have thought. But
although interestingly enough, the way that the Europeans are approaching the package travel regulations, it doesn't matter who takes the money. It's more about who does the organisation for the customer.
Okay, interesting.
So,
okay, well, that would very much bring the platforms in. Okay, interesting. This is a lot of legislation. Do what's your sense that the industry has a level of awareness about everything that's going on here?
Perhaps the industry knows about certain key bits of legislation. If you're already operating in a regulated market, like if you're selling holidays into Europe, you're probably already aware of what's going on in Europe and in the UK. But actually all of this other legislation that we've been talking about, which travel companies may not think applies to them, but if they're operating a platform which is available in Europe, then they are going to be caught by this. So, and I think actually just what perhaps this is what you're alluding to as well. One of the other issues that travel companies and all companies are probably facing at the moment is, I can't remember there being so much legislation coming out as what we have had in the last 2, 3, 4 years. Even as a lawyer, you've got to keep on top of this. It's very time consuming, it's very complicated. Particularly if you're selling into Europe, you've now got separate regulation and divergence between the UK and the European Union. So there's a huge amount and it's very difficult to keep on top of.
Yeah, and then there's AI as well. Okay, just as we wrap up here, you've talked a lot over the last kind of 15 minutes or so about tightening up consumer protection, bringing more companies into this various pieces of legislation. Traditionally, travel companies have appealed and kicked it down, the can down the line, and had fines reduced. Is there going to be the same sort of tightening up of the appeal procedure, would you say?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, the CMA have just been given new fining powers where they can fine up to 10% of global turnover, following a trend started off really by data protection
there were those breaches
and competition law breaches. So now those levels of fines are going to apply across all sectors who are consumer facing in the B2C market. So there is an appeal process. But essentially, the purpose of those appeals is really to check whether the regulator has actually implemented the finding rules correctly. And I think, particularly in the UK, there is a real push to increase the level of fines because the purpose of it is to be a deterrent. I think what they will try to do is to make an example of some travel companies, one of these 19 travel companies, to make an example of them. This is what they always do. And then they get everyone else to comply once they make an example of that one first unfortunate travel company.
So deterrent.
It's the deterrent.
Great. Rhys, thanks so much for joining us.
No problem.